That's my philosophy, and I hope maybe somebody can produce evidence-based information. But you find that countries where they are rich in resources, there's always some trouble going on, and you wonder why that is linked. So there's a strong link, I think, between the economics, the wars that go on, the geopolitics, and where the world is today. So being a student and graduate in this time is actually very different from our time as well. So having said that, I just want to say it's a privilege again to join you in this gathering of the World Future Studies Federation Conference, which is more, of course, than an academic event. And it's great to see the diversity of the people are represented. So we know that I would like, of course, to begin by just making a few reflections. Just to say that I know that Professor Diresh Ramjugannath, who's our rector, addressed you yesterday. And his reflections, of course, reminded us that foresight is not prediction, it is preparation, and it is also creativity, courage, and collaboration. Today, I want to build on the foundations by exploring what it truly means to thrive together. I think that's one area I really want to focus on. What does that mean? So not just to survive disruption, but to cultivate ways of living, learning, relating, and innovating that make collective flourishing possible. So I thought I should start with some quotations so that I don't send you to sleep, because I understand yesterday you partied a lot. So we need to work very hard to keep the energy in the room going. If you remember, one of the presidents, US presidents, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt, said that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. I think for me, in terms of creativity, and when we think about, how we can thrive, how we can build the future, that's an important one. And then the other one I wanted to share with you is Barack Obama, again, an American president, who said in his inaugural address, actually said that our destiny is not written for us, but by us. It's not written for us, but by us. And I think that is also loaded in terms of the future. And then from the African philosophy, this concept of Ubuntu. How many of you have heard of Ubuntu? Oh, that's so cool. So it's a global term, right? So I think that's where we share. So in this one, okay, the quotation says, I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. And this was written by John Beatty, an African philosopher, where he was interpreting the concept itself. So through this concept, it gives us a great sense of connectivity, of course, and unites all of us, irrespective of the continents where we come from and the regions and the borders as well. And then being, of course, responsible for research and innovation, I think I just want to also start off by also talking about what drives our agenda. I know usually people talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, yeah, which we always refer to. But also between the African Union and the European Union, we also reference the Africa Union, European Union Innovation Agenda. And in that agenda, the ministers actually who met, I think in 2020 already, agreed to focus on cooperation efforts on 4 priority areas, which I want to highlight because of the sustainability component. And these areas are public health, green transition, and then there's innovation and technology and capacities for science. So there are 4 areas. And of course, within those areas, you can break down. And I think they cover everything. But if you look at where we are now, I think where the world is now, my view is that there are 3 areas, I think, which have a big impact generally on our own sustainability and well-being. So climate in general, whether you talk about climate change, climate adaptation, whatever needs to happen, the climate is a big issue. And it also provides great opportunities. And then the other part is waste. We produce a lot of waste. We consume a lot, but we also produce a lot of waste. So the waste management part is also a key component of that. And then the AI and technology advancements, which is quite disruptive in many ways. Even the information, what type of information you get, how credible that information is. And then, of course, people tell you about issues around, security, the risks that are involved and so forth. But I think those areas, if you look at them and also the themes of the African Union, European Union agenda, they are quite related. And then I think the question that one asks when we talk about working together is also the role of governments, the role of business and civil society. And then the role of universities. I mean, we in the university sector are playing a big role in terms of education, but education for what and for whom? So I always ask myself this question because I know as universities, soon we'll be sitting again in another graduation ceremony. A lot of graduates pass through the stage. And it might be different in different countries, but in our context, I mean, the sense of not knowing what might happen to them next, what is next is a problem. Even PhDs, we have a large number of postdoctoral fellows. I think at this stage, we are almost close to 400 postdoctoral fellows. And if you look at the data, there's a term that we use for super postdocs. And what there's nothing wrong with being a super postdoc, but what actually it means is that so the postdoc finishes 5 years, they come back for another 5 years and another 5 years, but they're not getting any position, neither in the academic track, where ideally the postdoc should find a position, or in any relevant industry in their field. And that's at that level. Now you can imagine then when you come to undergraduate level, yes, we say, the data does show, I mean, currently, I think yesterday I was talking to at another workshop we had, where we're hosting a group of also universities that are looking at developing entrepreneurial curricula, with the SADC region as well. And in there, the stats show that, I think it's a 2024 stats essay report, around 60% of our youth are unemployed. And then, but the number of youth who have, the percentage for people with degrees, of course, is much less than the 60%, but still it's a very large percentage of youth unemployment. So while Europe in general might be having an aging problem, we are really, really blessed with youth. We have many babies. I mean, on the average, I think on the average, yeah, we have lots of babies. I know that so my mother, when she wanted to have 6 children, but my father said, no, 4 is enough, right? So, and then I know many colleagues in my age group, they have more kids. I mean, I could only have 2 because I was busy trying to, get a degree, do something else. They'll be like, oh, no, you get so old, you won't have enough babies. Okay, yeah, sure, that's true. It's true, you do get old. I mean, the clock ticks. Yeah, but I think the fact that Africa itself has a booming youth population is also an opportunity. But the sad part actually for me is like, if you look around, I mean, of course, we are privileged in certain areas. The youth who can't get access to anything that makes sense in terms of their contribution, can't find work, can't create work, don't have skills that are applicable that they can use, is still something we need to think about. And for me, when we talk about working together, it's really thinking about our own context and how we can contribute to that as well. So yeah, so we live in a world, of course, in a world of deep interconnection. So our economic systems are intertwined, our climate systems are shared. And we think about, of course, our colleagues in Jamaica, our friends and families who've been really devastated as well. Our technology systems cross borders and identities, and our intellectual work is enriched through global exchange. But as we all know, interdependence does not automatically lead to collaboration. So sometimes, of course, it may lead to conflict, competition, or fragmentation. And I just want to say something here. It's very interesting. So you all know about, of course, the changes in the US. Do we have colleagues from the US here today? Just raise your hand if you're from the United States. Yeah, just declare if you're from the United States. Thank you so much. At least, so we got at least. So we've had a very big. So there's been a shift in policy in terms of funding, as you know, due to the change in the policies in the US. I have to be careful what I say because we still get support from them in one sense. So we lost a lot of funding, which helped to support health research over many decades. And the research that we do as an African continent, we've contributed a lot to the research outcomes. And when I talk about research outcomes, for the medicine to come to a level where you can actually take it in, it takes a lot of trials. And it's the African population on average that has to actually, experiment. I mean, we do those trials, clinical trials over decades. I mean, when you talk about TB, HIV, AIDS, we've played a significant role. But of course, that funding over the years has been withdrawn, and we've suffered great impact in terms of that. And that's the first time when you realize that even our own governments actually don't invest enough so that it is sustainable, because how do you rely on everything for an external party to fund and then say that we want to drive an agenda? If we want to drive our own agenda, I think it's also important to invest in that agenda as well. So I think there are a number of issues that one could mention. But I think in the last few months or weeks, I must say, there's been some kind of reversal, but it's not to the same extent. I mean, we are still trying to get resources, looking at partnerships. So for us also, of course, the EU partnership is key, because the EU and the African Union have a common agenda, and we're trying to support that. Yeah, so I thought I should mention that. So collaboration, but the reason I was mentioning that is that, so because of that conflict, we had to look for other avenues of raising funds. So connections with China, for example, when the Chinese delegation we met with us, they said something like, well, you know, we can fund, but we don't want to fund anything that will benefit the other party. I'll not mention the other party. So it became difficult, I mean, to think about, okay, so if health affects everybody, it has no borders, right? So I can't say I'm going to do this health research, but it might not benefit a person, let's say in Australia or somewhere there. So it's a bit interesting. But so the whole idea of collaboration, yes, you can collaborate, but there are limits and as far as I understand. So it is still something that's interesting to think about. And then I think the other thing is that the issue of thriving and working together is that there is an African proverb, which most of you might know, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you translate it, that's what it means. But if you want to go far, go together. So this proverb actually reminds us of the trade-off between individual speed and collective endurance, okay, which suggests that solo work, that means working alone for quick progress and compared to teamwork, is necessary for long-term lasting achievements. It just means, working together can help us achieve our long-term achievements. So as we continue the conference, of course, and the themes that we are focusing on, let's remember, of course, what's happening in the world around us, not just, the conference for the sake of the conference. You have a nice conference, you go back, but just think about what will you take away? What can you do in your environment to impact? Can the research and the discussions that you have inform policy? Is it possible to also set up dialogues where people can talk about these issues, articulate issues that affect other regions as well? So I did talk about the issue around climate change, but in our own hometown here, geographically where we are, we have three big, what we call big challenges, and these are around poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and the rising cases, of course, of corruption, gender-based violence, and a number of things that go on. And in our own agenda, we want to be able to contribute to this. So we talk about, doing research for impact, the teaching and learning. We want the students to be conscious about what are the priorities in the communities, what are the challenges, and then what can one do in order to contribute to that? Because that's the only way we are going to succeed in terms of really having impact on our society and community. As we know, Africa, of course, is the youngest continent, but it is also a continent that has learned to innovate from, within its own constraints. In many ways, Africa has been practicing futures thinking without naming it as such. Okay, we didn't have a name, but in our indigenous languages, if you think, a lot of the indigenous tribes and even villages actually lived quite sustainably. You only took what you needed. And you only, I'm sorry to use this word, killed what you needed, if it was one chicken for dinner or something. But of course, with the, with colonization and also the, industrialization and so forth, there's been massive, of course, extinction of the natural sort of habitat. Yeah. So deforestation and things like that, which have had a big impact. But within the Africa itself, practicing futures, it has really been there even before it was named. And there are many examples one can give in terms of that. So also, I think the other thing I wanted to mention that we have had to, of course, anticipate risk, adapt systems, and weave informal networks and create solutions that are lean, community-based, and often brilliantly imaginative. as a university, one of our strengths is around the health research. So in health research, we do quite a bit, of work with the communities. And those communities have also helped us to advance the work that we do. So in terms of rankings, for example, we are ranked second within Africa itself after UCT. But I don't want to focus on rankings a lot because they only look at certain measures. They don't give you, they will not really tell you what impact you've had on the university, but just for our global colleagues to have an idea that within the continent, we produce a lot of research, but the health research has been very significant, and the contribution of the communities to those outcomes has also been really significant. So we have programs which help us to do that. And we are aware that we have to adapt to change. But we believe that, in fact, when the world asks how to build sustainable futures, Africa has some of the most valuable lessons to offer. And how to innovate where resources are scarce is one thing, I think, that we know. How to draw on communal knowledge and interdependence. How to design systems that are resilient rather than merely efficient. So Africa's challenges have shaped a creativity that is not theoretical, but it is a lived experience. And as the world faces climate upheaval, inequality, migration, and we know migration has become quite a big issue, and people tend to migrate actually to places where there are resources. So if you are just happy to develop just an isolated resource and not the other areas, of course, then it becomes very difficult to control the migration issues. And I think if you look at what's happening now, with the right-wing governments in Europe and elsewhere, the US, as well, and even here to some extent, because within the African continent, South Africa is also seen as an economic hub in some sense. So that push and pull becomes the push and pull reasons for why people migrate become a critical reason for one to look at. So I think when we think about the futures and sustainability, we should be looking at how can we create ecosystems which allow for not leaving just everybody looking to live in an isolated point in the city, but even in the villages, in other areas as well, I think, which is something we need to think about. The other thing I think I wanted to mention here is that Africa, of course, is not on the margins of futures thinking, but it is actually a laboratory. We are very rich. Actually, where you are here, we are very rich also in the biodiversity, culture, language. And I saw some of your themes, the themes that you're discussing today. It's a very rich base for research. I don't want to just offer that we are a laboratory. We are a laboratory for research, but we also like to receive people because we are also in the winelands, this part, and then where Stellenbosch is, a lot of things that one can do. But we'd like to take advantage of that in order to do good work to help others as well. So the role of universities in a time of complexity, yeah? Universities, okay, I did divert from my speech quite a bit, but I will, so we have what we call speech writers. So sometimes you have to check what they write the day before. I tried to check thoroughly, but of course some things look strange, like, oh no, not that one. So the role, yeah. So anyway, yeah, so universities, of course, the role of universities in a time of complexity, so I have to say something about that. So I did say that universities are future-making institutions, right, as by design. The graduates we train will live in a world that is not yet fully imagined. And I think it's important for us not to think of ourselves as just training graduates, right, for the market, or just so that we can publish, so that we can appear in the Q1 ranking journal and then, get our professorships and then be famous. Oh, I don't know, who's aspiring for a Nobel Prize in this group? Is anyone aspiring for the next Nobel Prize? No? Seriously, no. The reason I say that is that so Stellenbosch University is the only university currently where we host what we call the Nobel in Africa Symposium, and we also host fellows. So it's funded by of course the Wallenberg Foundation. So the people do the Nobel Prizes, and so you can actually apply to that institute to if you want to spend time to write up a book or do something. Or if you really want to get that prize, you want to do something creative, right? Because the prize itself is not based on the citations. They've emphasized that a lot. It's not, they don't like it when you present their application which says this person has 50,000 citations. They want the impact of the work, to be able to demonstrate. So it is something you may also think about if you want to come back. So there's if you go to the website, I think our colleagues from the center can advise you. It's the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study, and there's a number of fellowships there. Every year there are applications, and scholars come from all over the world. And it's a beautiful institute. And I'm saying that just because in case there are next people aspiring to spend some time here, but also the next Nobel Prize winners might come from here. So just to check in. So I was still trying to establish the role of universities in a time of complexity. So we need to, I think as universities, I've said a lot about what we could do, but we must also cultivate ethical wisdom and practice as well. And I think affecting how, I think being at the business school, I just think about how businesses, how do we make sure that businesses actually are ethical in what they do? And making sure that the business itself also contributes not just from getting from people, but also giving back to those communities. What models can we have? And then the capacity for collaboration as well. I think being able to create spaces where people can come together, even people who have different, they may not necessarily agree on certain principles, but allowing those dialogues to take place, because those can inform our knowledge. And then helping with critical thinking. Yeah. Most of us actually just live life. If you think about it, we just live. I don't think, we try to think, but then there are points where we don't really critique or even engage those that might need to be engaged with. We talk to ourselves because we are happy and everybody amongst us is happy. But how are we affecting the policymakers, the relevant governments? Are we presented at those tables where decisions are made? And are we presenting the evidence from the research we are doing to inform the governments, the relevant parties about the future and what needs to be done? So the question is, what actions are we taking? And I think the other part is really, reinforcing creativity and adaptability. So universities, we know, are the most difficult spaces to change. I don't know about your institutions, but I know that if you're in a 100-year university, try to change something. I think Andrew was you are known for changing a curricula in the shortest time, I understand. That is less than a year is a miracle. You need an award for that. But universities are just very difficult spaces to do change. And yet we also teach about change and we say, you must be innovative, you must be creative. But how often do we actually practice that in our own spaces? So I think it is something that we have to think about. And then compassion and social accountability is a key issue. So we say that we want to have impact on society, but does the society even know what we do? And what do we mean by society? Whom are we talking to? I think that's an important aspect. So at the university, our research and innovation is guided by two principles, really: knowledge co-creation for the benefit in service of society, and then innovation, which is meaningful to improve lives. So we actually support a lot of startups amongst our students. Of course, we are not happy with the numbers where we are now. We have about 30, since we started, I was told yesterday, the new data, there are 44 companies that we've helped establish through our incubator. But our target now is to reach as many as, I don't know if the rector talked to this yesterday, 300 students per annum to help them at least to start up a new enterprise. That's the aspirations. We don't know how, but we need the business school. We need, I think, even the work you are doing is something that can provide opportunities, because a lot of these students are really smart. They come here, we get the top students, but how do we explain that when they finish, they are also looking for, like, please, can you help me? Do you have a job? You ask, what did you do? I've done this degree, but they want anything that you can offer just so that they can live. And I think we should offer more opportunities for them to create something and creative spaces where this can be done. So, so at the institution, we would say futures thinking is in our institutional DNA, but I would like to see it in practice. So I think it's a challenge. Yes, it is in our DNA, it's in our papers, but the question is, how do we get everybody else to be, really excited by it and really doing something practical towards our own, improving our own systems, even within the university itself. I mean, we have quite a bit of a challenge there. So I'm really grateful that we have this discussion today. So I just want to give a few examples. So through the Institute for Futures Research at the Stellenbosch Business School today, this university has been engaging with long-term thinking for over 5 decades. And then I also just want to say that importantly, of course, this work is not only theoretical, it is expressed in real collaborations and research impact. And I know the center also presents also with the Department of Higher Education and Training and so forth. So through the Center for Sustainability Transitions, which is also another center, our researchers are designing climate adaptation pathways with communities across Africa. And then we have also what we call the School for Climate Studies, which is an interdisciplinary space. And here they are working on advancing work on water security, renewable energy systems, climate adaptation, and food resilience as well. And then as a university, we've set through these agendas, we also work with a number of networks. So the one network is the Africa Research University Alliance, which is a partnership of a number of African universities. And then on the European side, you have the Guild, which is also a group of research-intensive universities that we work with together. And we've set a common agenda through what we call these Africa-Europe clusters of research excellence. If you go to if you just check, if you Google the Africa-Europe clusters of research excellence, you see there's a list of clusters. And so it's a group of universities in Europe and Africa coming together, looking at the themes as they are set up as part of the African Union and European Union agenda. So they touch climate, health. There's something also on social, on the social sciences side as well. So we work through that. And then the other network, which we are part of, is the Guangzhou International Sister University Network, which also focuses on some of these themes. And then Utopia Global Networks, where we co-create with our partners across the continent and the world. And then through, of course, the Stellenbosch University Launch Lab and Innovation Accelerator programs, we support young researchers and entrepreneurs to convert research insights into solutions and strengthen our society. But then again, there we've seen that whilst there are lots of startups, not so many women are involved. Yeah, some are, very few women. And then when we look about diversity, the people from the communities where this might even have a greater impact are even much less. So we still have a challenge in terms of being inclusive and how we can reach other communities as well, especially when we talk about township economies. So that's one area we need to continue driving. And then we know that thriving, since the theme was on thriving does require courageous questions, of course. So if we hope to thrive together, we must be willing to ask difficult questions. How do we ensure that technology innovation does not deepen inequality? That's the first part. Yeah. So I think if you think about it, there is technology, but the access to it is unequal, quite unequal when you think about it. The other part is that how do we transition to new economies without leaving communities behind? I'm not sure in Europe how this plays out, but in our context, the inequality gap is huge. So the communities to us, like I mentioned earlier, mean a lot. So we want to make sure that we transition to new economies, taking everyone with us. How do we protect our climate while respecting the developmental needs of the global South? And how do we build societies where diversity strengthens rather than divides? How do we measure progress beyond the GDP of our country? So these questions do not have quick answers, by the way, but by answering them, we require to cultivate spaces of trust and then methods of inquiry, which this conference would demonstrate, I think, from the methodologies that people are using to do the research. Understanding our heritage, like I mentioned, the context and role of indigenous knowledge systems and practices is important. Knowledge and information dissemination, which includes science communication, because in most cases, yes, you can have great results, we can have great research, but if we do not communicate, if we cannot break that down for policymakers to understand, if we just leave it in our academic language, how do we make sure that we're making an impact? And then listening across differences, of course. So the conference like this, of course, matters because it provides opportunities for engagement and sharing evidence-based recommendations that could be shared widely. Imagination is not a luxury, it's a tool for survival. So when systems become unstable or uncertain, imagination is often the first thing that gets constrained. So because normally when something happens, so for example, around, we tend to have, when we have a crisis like where we are now, the first thing is we tighten the budget, and then we focus on the urgent matter, and then we try to manage the risk. But the future is not changed by efficiency alone, because you can do all of that, but it will not affect the future. It is changed by vision, a shared vision where we need to use our imagination to strategically come up with shared solutions as well. I'll be closing soon, sorry. I don't know, you can tell me, you can ring the bell when it's too much time for me. Yeah, okay. So the other part I think I wanted to mention was really to thrive together is to commit to each other. So there's no thriving without solidarity. That's the one thing. So if we want shared futures, we must be willing to build shared purpose. Thriving together requires a cultural shift. It asks us to remember that progress is not meaningful unless it is shared. And then it asks us to design innovation and humanity at the center, and then cultivate hope grounded in action, not optimism, but and detached from reality. So it asks us to respect our land, the soil where we actually get everything for. You know, so we've just had a book. I think there's a group in our law faculty that has just published a book on it's not the law of soil, it's soil. It's about soil, but it's about the legal aspects of soil, not the soil itself, but how to make sure it's about land, I think, when you think about it. So soil, but it's about soil. I'll share the book title when so I think, so that book for me, I think it says a lot about the role that soil can play, because you know that if you reuse soil and you don't replenish it, you can't get more, more than what you can from it. So there are many spaces where, for example, where mining takes place, for example, and then, you know, the pollution and what happens to the soil. So they are looking, I think, at the legal aspects of how we can protect our soils and the regulations which countries must use to make also business accountable, you know, for the sustainability component. So I think that's an important aspect one should also look at as well. So to thrive together really means that we need to search in our own areas and communities in terms of how can we contribute? What are the key issues in our regions? It's quite interesting. I know I'm a mathematician by background, so I'm very happy if you just give me a screen and I can do some computations, right? So if you ask our students generally, like you ask them, did you listen? Do you know what's going on about, let's say, politics or something? There's a group of students who know, of course, in the social sciences and so forth, but the computer, blah, 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 they actually look, they're disconnected, sorry to say, disconnected from the world. And so one of the challenges I've said to our computer colleagues, our computer science colleagues, is to, how do we get the students who are doing computing interested in the social issues that we have? So I think they've introduced a module where they allow, like, you can go as a guest lecturer to tell them about what are the critical issues. Then they can use that to do a project around it, which helps to make them, you know, more conscious of what's going on, but also to use their skills to apply to a real-time problem as well. So I think just making sure, I think, as academics, as universities, that the curricula that we have actually is open to, like, what's happening around the world in your area, what's happening, what can have impact on the community, and how can students develop skills which help them to work in any context, because now to solve any problem, you need many players. And I think that's an important aspect that we need to think about. And then, so yeah, so I think what I wanted to say was just that, so what are we asking for? So there's no thriving without solidarity, we said. So thriving together, we said, requires a cultural shift. And then it asks us to remember that progress is not meaningful unless it is shared. And then that to design innovation with humanity at the center needs co-creation, bringing different stakeholders together so that you understand what the issues are and how you can co-create in whichever situation you are in. It asks us to cultivate hope grounded in action and not optimism detached from reality. So it asks us to respect our land, the soil, the water, and our heritage. And this is our land, we know, and this is our heritage, and let's all take care of it as we move forward. So in closing, the future is not somewhere where we arrive. I had mentioned that earlier. We have to create it. It is something we build through the choices we make today. I think we will be judged, this generation will be judged very harshly by the future generations, because I think we've been very irresponsible in terms of how we keep our resources. So when we think, don't just think for ourselves today, think about the future generations that come after us. We thrive together when we care for the planet that sustains us, when we invest in the young who will lead us, when we protect the vulnerable who depend on us, and when we learn from one another across borders and identities. So act with courage, even when the path is uncertain. I know that sometimes speaking the truth can cost you a lot, especially those, if you have engaged with politicians, you understand this, even during COVID. I mean, when researchers found something, we had very strict protocols of how you can announce what you found. And some people would get very excited and say, oh, I found this, but they got very big pushback as well. So we know that truth can cost you, but we ask that you act with courage even when the path is uncertain. When we value our heritage and our indigenous knowledge systems, we can succeed. And in every continent, I think there's something about the First Peoples nations. I know that Australia talks about the First People, but if you study the culture, what they did, and in here, in South Africa, at least this part, if you're interested in core history, you should also check it out. Very interesting as well. But rooibos tea, which we drink as well, is something which they already knew. And then when it was branded, for some time there were no benefits for those communities. It's only later. So there's a number of things. And then if you go, I think places like China, traditional medicine is a key component. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from history as well, that we can take from that. So I just wanted to emphasize that part. So this is the work of our time to make sure that future generations can live, and it is the work we can only do together. So with that, I want to say thank you. I look forward to the conversations that will challenge us today, stretch us, and strengthen our resolve to imagine and build shared futures where communities have the opportunity not only to survive, but to truly thrive. So with those words, I wish you well, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the engagements today. Thank you.